What brought you from the bench back to practice?
Having a newborn was an eye-opening experience. And she's my second, so it's not like I didn't know what it was like to have one. But this was a very different situation because I felt like I was being physically pulled away from my newborn. And so I was on the bench. I was, a nursing mother. And then by the time I would finally get to my daughter, I hadn't seen her all day. And I would just run in the house and grab her and hold her close and nurse her. And then in the morning when I'd leave, I would just cry. So ultimately, I decided that I am needed more by my daughters than anyone else. And so I left.
You're making me well up. Howdy, and welcome to the show. Cooper's Code focuses on legal issues and notable practitioners, distilling wisdom so we can all achieve the best results for our clients. I'm Miles Cooper, and I'm very excited for this conversation with Nina Shapirshteyn, partner at Abramson Smith Waldsmith LLP, and one of California's most decorated plaintiffs' trial lawyers. Nina represents individuals and families in serious injury and wrongful death cases with a proven trial record. Nina was named Trial Lawyer of the Year by San Francisco Trial Lawyers Association after securing a $79.8 million verdict in 2015, the largest in California that year. Santa Clara County later honored her with the same award after she won 3 separate multimillion-dollar jury verdicts for plaintiffs in a single year, an unprecedented achievement. Nina is a member of ABOTA and a fellow of the International Academy of Trial Lawyers, both invitation-only organizations recognizing elite trial lawyers. She also served as a Superior Court judge appointed by Governor Newsom, giving her a rare perspective on both sides of the courtroom. So please sit back and enjoy this wide-ranging conversation with Nina Shapirshteyn. Welcome to the show, Nina.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to come in.
I've listened to your podcast for quite a while now, probably a year ago, and you've had incredible attorneys on your podcast, and I'm just honored to be one of them now.
Well, you definitely are in the hall of people who should be here. So,
thank you.
If you've listened, I oftentimes start kind of at the beginning, which is a bit about your background in terms of where you grew up, what shaped you, and ultimately what got you down the path to becoming a lawyer. So it's a big, broad question, but I expect you can run with it.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in Kyiv, Ukraine, the capital of Ukraine. This was back during the Soviet times. So Ukraine was one of the republics of the Soviet Union. It was a very different reality that I live in now. Having said that, I had a wonderful childhood, but certainly that is what shaped who I am today. And it's one of those things, is it nature versus nurture? I don't know, but I will say that we had a very rigorous education system, Soviet education system. It was intended to create specialists in hard sciences and math. And so our schooling was very disciplined. You learned to think on your feet, literally. In class, you were called on almost every time, and you had to stand up in front of your classmates and answer questions. And every time it was like an oral exam. You were literally graded on your answer. So you better know what you're saying and be prepared. So I think that really carried me a long way once I moved here as well.
How old were you when you came here?
So I started my freshman year of high school here. So as a teenager, not an ideal time to move. And I didn't really speak English, but I had that foundation of, we started physics and chemistry and biology there in 5th grade. And my math skills were certainly above my peers here. I didn't understand the problems because I didn't understand the language. And my mom would translate for me, which is not saying much because she was in her 40s and didn't know it. But, it certainly made the transition a lot easier.
Do you find that background in the hard sciences is something that has played a part in your legal career?
Oh, 100%. It's not really my knowledge of math or physics, but it's the format in which that was taught and the discipline that was fostered through that educational system that really shaped how I approach my cases, how I do any type of work, really. It's about preparation. And part of it is that immigrant scarcity mentality that is not unique to the Soviet Union by any stretch of imagination, but is probably true for most people who immigrate to another country, right? Because you find how to be resourceful and work under pressure and do the most with the little you have. And in fact, I think about that a lot. And how do I now create that in my children? So, right, on one hand, I want them to have everything. On the other hand, I want them to know what it's like to not necessarily struggle, but to fight a little bit. We didn't get participation trophies in school. You had to be the best at everything, and that was the reality I was raised in.
And you raise an interesting point in terms of what some people refer to as a scarcity mindset versus an abundance mindset. And do you still approach the practice in life with a scarcity mindset?
Yes.
Can you articulate that?
I don't expect things to be easy. I expect them to be hard. I expect to work hard to get somewhere. Even though I've been practicing now for close to 20 years, I don't ever think that this case is going to be easy or I've done this before. I start with a blank canvas and look for problems and issue spot and prepare for everything to be challenging.
You've reached a point in terms of your level of success where you could have associates, paralegals, other people working with you or for you on cases. How do you pursue your cases?
I like to do my own discovery. I like to sit down with a client. This is how I learn about the case. I do a very long intake, first of all, but when it comes to answering interrogatories, I'll have the staff create the shells, but I want to sit down with a client, and this is my opportunity to learn about them. I don't want to first learn about my client when I am about to go to trial. I do think it's important to delegate, but not discovery. That's not something I'm willing to do. In fact, I learned that from Jack Stein, with whom I've worked a lot over the years. He's associated me on a lot of cases, and I have seen his level of success at the Backlog law firm, obviously. And I mean, the guy would always just do his own interrogatories. And I found that impressive after practicing for what must have been 60 years for him.
Yeah. You mentioned him bringing you into cases. Do you also co-counsel on cases? Given your trial experience and that there aren't as many lawyers out there with the level of trial experience that you have, I imagine people approach you and say, could you come into a case?
Yeah. I have to say that a lot of calls I get are about product cases. And I love product cases. Who doesn't, right? They're obviously very expensive to litigate, but they're really fun. And then and then some insurance bad faith cases that I actually recently was approached about. And then I'll essentially parachute in. Hopefully, I can come in earlier rather than later. That's my preference. And that way I can really shape the case. I do take all my own depositions. And the way I approach depositions, especially in product cases, but really every case now, is that this is a deposition that I'm going to be playing in trial. So I like to have all my exhibits ready, the demonstrative exhibits, as I would show to the jury in court. I do that with treating physicians. I have them teach to the jury, and I will say that, would you please explain to the jury? And, have all the illustrations, all the medical illustrations ready. I really like to collaborate with my staff, with my partners, and brainstorm cases together. But I also like to control my discovery and know everything about the case.
That makes sense. Do you primarily work in an office? Do you work from the house? Do you do a combination?
I'm trying to get another office for us because I live in Menlo Park. My partners are in San Mateo, Hillsborough area, and our office is in San Francisco. So we usually come here once a week. We all drive in together. I'll talk about the cases while we do that, go out to lunch. But I'd like to go in maybe 3 times a week. Right now, I'm working from home a lot, from my home office, which I like as well. But it's nice I like to be around people.
I'd like to go back in time and approach how you found yourself interested in the law. Where did that passion first show up?
Yeah, it wasn't readily apparent to me. I didn't grow up thinking I wanted to be a lawyer. I probably grew up thinking I wanted to be the general secretary of the Soviet Union at the time, My background did play an important role in it. My mom's grandfather was a political prisoner in a gulag, imprisoned by Stalin. And my grandmother, who was his daughter, actually wrote a letter to Stalin asking to release him, which probably is a really brave thing to do.
Yeah.
Because she certainly was risking her freedom, if not her life, in doing that. He was ultimately released. And by the time he was released, he had been tortured and died shortly thereafter. And then on my dad's side, my dad himself, he met my mom at the Moscow State University. He was from Ukraine. My mom was from Russia. And he traveled to Moscow to study there. And when they met, that was obviously also during communism. A lot of literature was forbidden. My father printed forbidden books. He photographed every page and, distributed to his friends, his classmates at the university. So there was always a sense of what is right and big belief in democracy, even though I was growing up in this very strict communist society. I had that family background that allowed my mind to wander. There was a lot of corruption going on once the Soviet Union broke down, and I was there for all that. And it was kind of a free-for-all. And so Ukraine was a very young democracy. There was a lot of lawlessness. Judges could be bribed and were bribed, and laws were created to target specific individuals or businesses and applied ex post facto. So it was a very difficult environment because you never knew what was legal when the law could be changed at any moment. And so the law wasn't used for justice. It was used as an opportunity for corruption. So coming here, I was really struck by what the law allowed you to do in this country, and that it allowed fairness and justice. And that I found that very attractive. Having said that, I didn't think about becoming a lawyer for a long time. I went to college at UC San Diego, and consistent with my roots, I was going to major in math. And and about halfway through my education, I realized, well, okay, what am I going to do with math? I switched to what was called a management science major, which is basically a mix of math and economics.
Okay.
And generally, once you major in that, you go into finance and consulting. I did end up finishing that major and getting a job out of college. And I just remember my boss at the time sent me home with a bunch of books they wanted me to read. And I realized I was going to be in this office solving problems, which was not what I wanted to do. I loved math. I loved solving problems, but I also loved being around people and sharing that with people. And then I realized that what I loved about math wasn't necessarily the numbers, but it was that excitement of solving the problem. And somehow between that and my admiration for the American system of justice, at least at that time, led me to law school. So I took a year off. I never showed up to that job. I took a year off and I traveled around Europe, took the LSAT, and the rest is history.
You made a little bit of an aside in terms of the justice system, the American justice system.
Right.
And can we follow that for a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. It's very difficult to watch what's happening now in this country. I really bought all in. I was all in on this democracy we have here, the rule of law. Having seen the other side, I had utmost respect and belief in this system. And I never imagined, I never realized how fragile it was. The attack on the rule of law, the partisanship that is apparent in the Supreme Court is disappointing, is a huge understatement.
Earlier, when you were talking about the experience in the Soviet collapse and laws being made specifically to target folks, there's a line, for my friends, anything, for my enemies, the law. And it made me think a little bit about some of the things that we're seeing right now in this country.
Right. It's probably, I've thought about this quite a bit, how what's happening now is perceived by Americans who grew up here versus how I see it. And I almost wonder if it's more painful for me to watch because, in a way, when you grow up here, you take it for granted because you don't know anything else. But I was just starstruck by this society. I was the system of checks and balances and, the fight against corruption and what this country had achieved was everything to me. And to see it collapsing like this is devastating. And when you grow up here, you might not understand how quickly this can crumble once it starts. And when people are being hauled away by agents in masks without any identification, without any reason, without any accountability. I've seen that movie before. And it is a dangerously slippery slope.
Is there anything from your background or experience, having seen it in through another lens, through another country, that you feel is helpful or hopeful for how we can approach our present situation?
It's always the people that make the difference, right? Although some can say that the Soviet Union ultimately collapsed because there was a miscommunication, right? There's that theory. But look at Hungary now, right? When people understand what is at stake and they finally get out and vote and get together, change can happen. And that's what we all need to do.
So pivoting back into law school, as you got to law school, did you find that there were any particular areas of law that drew you in?
Certainly, yes. I loved my First Amendment class. I enjoyed torts, evidence, civil procedure. I remember my civil procedure class and people saying that it was really difficult. And to me, everything just made sense. Like there was a process for everything. I think I craved that structure, right? And then evidence makes sense. It's what's fair. So I really enjoyed law school. I liked my trial advocacy class. I was in law review. I did enjoy writing, but I will say that law review may not have been the most fun I've had in law school. But yeah, also I was 21. I was in New York and it was a great time.
Yeah. I have a note, and it might be incorrect, but that tax was also something that you enjoyed. Is that?
Oh gosh, I haven't thought about that in so long. But yes, yes, I did enjoy tax very much, and that is I realize how crazy that sounds because this is tax season now, and it's dreadful. But back then, it also made sense. I think it was just everything that is logical and that I can take and apply is enjoyable to me. And so I got a job actually doing tax law out of law school. And again, I had to correct. And that it's probably terrible that I agreed to do this job out of law school and then went back on it. But at least I did that before actually committing a lot of years and effort to it. But I had to be true to myself and kind of say to myself, yes, I like this, but what I really like is I like working with people. I don't want to be a transactional attorney. And that's what ultimately led me to litigation. And I think my road was always, I like this, so I'm going to go this way. Oh, need to correct because, it's not everything I want. And finally, I found everything that I wanted in litigation. I got to work with people. I got to solve problems. I got to apply what I learned and to continue learning all the time. That's what we do, right? Especially with experts. I used to say, I don't see myself being anything but a lawyer. And then after practicing for a while and talking to all these experts, to accident reconstructionists and biomechanical engineers and biomedical engineers and doctors, you realize as you get deep into something, you really begin to enjoy it. And that goes back to solving problems. And so I would enjoy anatomy. I would enjoy learning about a certain surgery or, physics. And I'd say, I could see myself being a doctor. I could see myself doing this. But as a lawyer in litigation, you get all that. You can do all that. And that's what makes our job so fun.
Part of what I sometimes do with this is distill things for our listeners. It sounds to me like you're judging yourself for perhaps being interested in a job and then determining that it's not a right fit. Whereas the learning that I would imagine some of our listeners should hear is you are quick to figure out what is not right for you and willing to take the bold steps to follow through on not doing something that is not right.
Sure. And that's, I was joking about it.
Okay.
I mean, I'm very happy with my decisions. And I was also 21, 24 at the time, which you're still kind of a child. So, so I will give myself grace and I will give myself credit for figuring out that that's not what I want to do. And I mean, how are you supposed to know what you want to do in college, right? Until you're actually really faced with that job and you can really feel and imagine what every day is going to be like. That's when you can tell. So ultimately, absolutely, I 100% believe that if whatever job someone is considering is not what you want to do, you should never do it because you're not going to enjoy it and you're not going to be good at it. You can't.
I think that there are a lot of young people who may not get that and who fall into the pattern of just grinding before they realize that it is not right fit.
Right. I've seen a lot of lawyers who became lawyers because trial lawyers, because it looked glamorous on TV and it looked really fun, and it's just not their personality and it's not what they should have ever been doing. And it took them years to finally say, I quit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Going to your, I guess, first job that you did take at a law firm, did that ultimately end up being litigation?
Yes. Yes. So my first job with Terry O'Reilly, who has since passed away, but it was doing exactly what I do now. It was in litigation, plaintiff's personal injury side.
And a legend of the bar. That firm is a firm that many lawyers, like Picardo or others, there are firm names that stand out, and his is one of them.
Yes, and I was very lucky. I actually went back to San Diego after law school, and I was in the Bay Area briefly visiting my parents. And my father, who insisted that I look for jobs here, I did not want to live here. I wanted to live in San Diego still. I saw that posting, and it was actually for I think they were hoping to get an associate with a few years of experience, and I hadn't passed the bar yet. And I applied. I got an email right away and interviewed the next day. I had to go buy a suit and drove to the interview from the store in my new suit. And then I got the job and ended up moving here and working there for a very long time until ultimately the firm dissolved. But after that, I ended up obviously working with other lawyers and doing the exact same thing because I loved it.
I think one of the things that I personally find interesting, there are people who follow like sports and sports teams and what have you. I've always been interested in lawyers. So like the history of Picardo or the history of a firm like O'Reilly, I think you're the first person short of like Mike Danko and Christine Meredith who I've spoken to who was inside. What was it like being an associate there?
Well, it was, at the time, I didn't know any different, right? Because I had just started. I guess my only job was at a big law firm in New York as a summer associate. And so to me, I thought that's how it was supposed to be. It was intense. Terry O'Reilly was a big personality. with big ideas. And my first case, I tried with him. I obviously passed the bar then. It was probably 6 months after I passed the bar. And the guy never lost a beat. I mean, he just was unshakable. He had a strong belief that he was always right. And he would make other people believe that too, even if he weren't.
Interesting. Are there things about that approach that you felt were helpful in terms of where you are, or things that were potentially harmful from that approach?
I know. I remember one moment in trial when, I don't remember if it was a misrepresentation that at least he and I viewed that was going on or what it was, but I was getting a little worked up at counsel's table before arguing. And he said, "Nina, poise, always poise." Which he didn't always follow, by the way. But that stayed with me. And of course, I learned from all the lawyers I've ever worked with, most of whom, I think all of them, were older men. So I say that, but obviously, as a woman, my approach is very different, has to be very different. Terry would get angry, and he was a very big guy with a booming voice, and it was very intimidating for opposing counsel, certainly, and maybe judges. And that's not something I could ever do, not necessarily that I want to do. But with women, we have to be very careful, because what works for men doesn't work for women in our profession and politics across the board. It's not as palatable to the jury, to judges. So yes, I watched, I learned, and I tweaked things and made them my own. But I will say that one thing that stayed with me was, regardless of his style, he was authentic. And that's what you have to be in this profession, especially as plaintiff's counsel who is coming to the jury asking for a bunch of money. And you have to be honest with the jury, you have to be honest with the judges, and you have to be honest with yourself and true to yourself. If the jury is questioning your motives or the truth in what you're claiming, you've lost the case, in my opinion.
I want to explore what you just said a bit further, because I think it's important. If your initial mentors and guides were mostly older white men, how did you find your way in terms of being genuine and how you were going to present and recognize that there are still gender biases that create problems for female lawyers versus male lawyers?
Trial and error. You make mistakes. You learn, you grow, you get older, right, is a big part of it. And it's not just watching lawyers, it's watching politicians, understanding what is acceptable to you, going to seminars, constantly learning. I used to be so hyper aware as a young lawyer of how I present it. And it would be, what color should my hair be for trial? What is acceptable for the jury? Should I be wearing a wedding ring so that people take me more seriously, so that I appear more mature? What do I wear? And it is so nice to get to a point in your career where you realize it doesn't matter. Obviously, you should dress professionally and have court appropriate attire, but it's more about being yourself. And you can't try to create this picture of what you think a lawyer should be, this ideal person who is acceptable to everyone. In fact, I have this painting at my house that I got with my daughter, and it says, "Why do you care if everyone likes you? You don't even like everybody." What people don't like, though, more than your hair color or what you wear or how young or old you are, is if you're inauthentic. So what I would say to young lawyers, especially female attorneys, is just be yourself.
Was experience and maturity the things that have made it so that you've realized that it doesn't matter? Or whether if you had been a young lawyer, you could have put aside things like what you're wearing or wedding rings or other pieces?
It was probably experience. It's hard to describe it now to young lawyers because times have certainly changed quite a bit. But when I was starting out, and I was a lot more lucky than my female predecessors, but when I was starting out, it was a predominantly male profession, especially in litigation. And I certainly was called everything else but a lawyer, right? I was a secretary. I was a court reporter. I was even called a driver. Someone thought I was Terry O'Reilly's driver. And
he's got nice cars.
I'm also a good driver.
Okay.
I'm an excellent driver. And they used to offend me. And I'd get frustrated when I was really young, right? Because you want to prove yourself and you want to be recognized for your skills, I guess, is the reason I was getting offended. It's hard to remember now, but that still happens to me now. It happened to me as a judge, right? I was asked if I were a court reporter just more recently.
In your own department?
Well, not by my staff.
No, but like you were in your department, somebody...
Right, I wasn't wearing a robe. that would be a whole different level.
I bet that person was kicking themselves.
But now, I went back to private practice, and it still happens. And when people find out that I'm a lawyer, they underestimate me, and I welcome that now. I don't get offended. I'm at a point where I know who I am. I know they'll see who I am, but also I don't really care if they see who I am. I want them to underestimate me because then they're not prepared. And that's not just opposing counsel, that's experts, right? You learn that people who underestimate you, who will call you names, they're not your people. And, they're a small percentage of people who won't make a difference in your life. And they're not probably very happy with themselves and doing this work. So it just now it rolls off my shoulder. And I wish I had known that earlier and I would have saved myself some disappointments.
That makes a lot of sense. In a similar vein, and I bring this up because I will admit that when I had young kids as a trial lawyer, it felt like I had one arm literally tied behind my back in terms of being the advocate that I had been before I had children. The idea of there being, I always used to be able to outwork people, but when you've got young ones around, that just, you have to come up with a different skill set, and it or toolbox. And it took me a long time to figure out my way around that. So that's my lead into a question for you, which is, I think you said yours are 2 and 6.
Right.
How have you managed the rigors of trying cases while still being an effective parent?
It was a lot easier when I was 9 months pregnant and I was trying cases. They're still inside you.
Yes.
That's also, it's not just having kids. I think it's also just getting older with more experience, right? You learn, like you, when I was a young lawyer, my attitude was, no one is going to outwork me. I will work nights. I don't care if there is a big law firm on the other side and they have 10 lawyers dedicated to this case and I'm the only associate in my firm and one partner. I was going to outwork everyone and I was going to know everything, every document. I've also learned that you can work smarter, not harder, and accomplish the same. I think that comes with experience, but I don't ever want to feel that mom guilt. I make time for my kids and then I make time for work. And the beautiful part about where I am in my career is making my own schedule. So I can work after my kids go to sleep. I can work when they're at school, but I'm going to be there to walk my daughter to school. I do that every day with my little one. I'll put her in a stroller and walk her to school. And I'm going to pick her up from school and we'll spend time together. And that way I am able to then focus on my work because I feel like my responsibility as a mom has been fulfilled, that my kids are happy with the time they spend with me. So yes, of course, we struggle and there's that balance. When I went on the bench, I was pregnant and my youngest one was born when I was a judge, and that was very difficult in terms of zero flexibility because you have to be in the courtroom. Not much is going on without you. So when it's 9 to 5, you got to be there and you have a newborn. So that is really hard to do because life is short and my kids need me more than any profession is how I see it.
Since you're mentioning kids and some of the structure of being a judge, I think now's the time to ask, what brought you from the bench back to practice?
I never thought about being a judge, first of all. And I really enjoyed what I was doing. I loved my practice. And I mean, when I say I loved, it truly brought me joy. I know that one of the reasons or one of the things that judges enjoy about leaving private practice is not having clients, not waking up in the middle of the night and thinking about this case and have I done this and that. That's a part I loved and love about a case. I love obsessing about my cases and waking up in the middle of the night thinking of a new idea or how to present something. So the reason I decided to be a judge, which I think is important in answering your question to begin with, is because, there was this thing called COVID and many courts were practically closed and cases weren't moving, especially civil cases, as we all recall, which seems like forever ago, and it's kind of hard to imagine that now, but that was our reality back then. Criminal cases had priority. And there was a call to arms, so to speak. And I decided, I can help. I'll go do it. And I felt very grateful to this country. I wanted to contribute. I wanted to help, and it was about public service for me. And certainly, I was obviously giving up the financial aspect of being a lawyer to do that. But I felt fortunate in my successes thus far, and I felt that I was in a position to give back. And that's why I did it. So then your question, though, getting back to your question, which was leaving the bench, was a difficult decision. Having a newborn was an eye-opening experience. And she's my second, so it's not like I didn't know what it was like to have one. But my first one was born during COVID. And so I spent a lot of time with her. I had an au pair at the time, and I was working from home, so I could be with her as much as I wanted. She would wander in my office and say hello, and we would spend some time together. And I felt like I was with her every day. This was a very different situation because I felt like I was being physically pulled away from my newborn. And so I was on the bench. I was, a nursing mother and had to take breaks all the time. And then by the time I would finally get to my daughter, I hadn't seen her all day, and I would just run in the house and grab her and hold her close and nurse her. And then in the morning when I'd leave, I would just cry. So ultimately, I decided, like I said, that I am needed more by my daughters than anyone else. And so I left.
You're making me well up.
And it's hard to think back to that period because it was, as a mom, as a parent, as there's just this biological connection and a physiological connection that you feel to your children. And I just felt like I was being ripped away from my child, and I felt an immense amount of guilt for nobody made me do that. I did that myself. And that was really hard. By the time I left the bench, she was 2 years old, 2.5, and certainly was much easier than a newborn. But my older daughter was getting more aware, was also asking, we live in an area where a lot of mothers do not work. And she was asking questions like, why is that you don't volunteer in the school and all these parents are always there and I just felt that the sacrifice I was making wasn't worth, I guess that ultimately I wasn't just sacrificing my time or the financial aspects of being a lawyer, but I was sacrificing my time with my children, and that I refused to do.
One of the observations I've had post-COVID is there seems to have been a very significant turnover on the bench. In all the counties that I've been practicing in, a lot of the longtime judges seem to have, and I don't know if it's everyone kind of aged out at the same time or the COVID and the Zoom judging has just been so devastating. But there's been a big turnover in the bench. And it's a broad, open-ended question about whether when you were on that side of things, whether that was something that was talked about or commented on.
I remember I was trying a case in Alameda County, and it was a very law and motion intensive case. And our judge told us, hey, you need a discovery referee. You're not my only case, and you're here in front of me all the time. I have 500 other cases. And I was like, wow, that is a lot of cases.
Yeah.
And in San Mateo County, judges have 2,000 cases.
2,000?
Right.
Wow.
So that was, in 2012, I'm talking about 500 cases. So I think one of the things that changed after COVID is just the sheer volume of cases. We need more judges. And the calendar for civil judges is backed up, right? As you know, many times you can't get a hearing until 4 months out, if that. That's because of how many cases there are. A lot of judges certainly don't like Zoom. I will say that I was obviously used to Zoom as a lawyer by the time I became a judge because everything was on Zoom, our depositions and hearings. But as a judge, I didn't like it. I didn't like it. You're in this courtroom without any windows all day, and you want to see some human beings, at least. So it's really nice when people show up, and then what I also remember seeing a lot of then these lawyers on Zoom would not even have the courtesy to dress up. And you're thinking, really, this is for your convenience. You don't have to drive anywhere. You don't have to fly anywhere. That would normally take hours. You're in the comfort of your home. I don't even care if you're not wearing pants. I don't see it. Just have the decency to put on a tie and court-appropriate attire. And I would always tell that to lawyers. And there's a feeling amongst judges that generally the respect for the courtroom has fallen drastically. And it's hard to say if it's because of Zoom or what, but I think Zoom certainly contributed to that, as well as the decline of civility. Because when you hide behind a camera, behind your computer, you tend to be a little bit more, or maybe people feel a little more protected and isolated and act differently.
From a practitioner's perspective, the emptiness of the courthouse, as opposed to running, I used to, the good old days, right? The feeling of walking down the hall and running into people that you knew and exchanging ideas and popping into a courtroom and seeing a trial seems to have just completely disappeared.
Yeah, and that's very sad. I mean, I think that's where a lot of experience also would come from. And all of a sudden you see a different lawyer question a witness and you get some tips and you talk about the case and share ideas. That doesn't, it's not a thing anymore. And then on Zoom also, it's not an environment that is conducive to chatting, right? You're trying to make sure you're not interrupting anyone, and you're not, which is different when the lawyers are in the courtroom. You can joke around, you can, and it's a warmer environment. And I said to myself, after being a judge, I said, I will always show up in person.
Have you followed through with that?
I haven't had to yet because the only hearings I had were in federal court and Zoom was required.
Interesting. Thank you for listening. And please join us next week as we continue this conversation. Please email us at podcast@coopers.law with questions, comments, feedback, and suggestions for who we should have on the show. Like what you heard? Share us with a colleague and leave us a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. To all of you doing justice out there, happy hunting.